Hey, welcome to the next episode of the podcast. Glad you joined us. Make sure to subscribe and also leave comments. Each week we'll put up new shows. If you're a new subscriber, check out all the past episodes as well to catch up. But we look forward to continue talking and hope you enjoy what we're hearing at this point.
So I actually had something that I was going to bring up.
Do it.
Wait for it.
Harden trade.
Does Mike even know about that?
No. Well, I mean, it's not so much about the trade. I don't really care too much.
You know
about
who Harden is, by the way, right?
My thing is, how do you guys feel about players forcing teams to either trade them, not draft them, players having more control over the team? You know, in my experience, with how LeBron was with the Cavs. How do you feel about players having more control over the team than sometimes the owner or the GM or coach?
Well, I think it starts with the organization then.
Yeah.
The organization is going to be a bunch of fucking pushovers. Then they're going to get controlled like they were. Look at San Antonio. Greg Popovich has never let a player just control him. Even when freaking Kawhi was bitching and moaning about the whole thing, he didn't do shit to appease him. Sure, he tried to work with him, but he didn't care. That was the organization, and that's why they always made the playoffs and would compete for titles.
Yeah.
If you're an organization that's weak-minded at the top, like the Houston Rockets were for years, letting Morey just try and build everything around this lazy-ass player, Harden, who wanted everything his way, and then suddenly he's like, you know what? I just don't care anymore. I want out. You know, that's a problem. But again, if you're the one, if your organization isn't capable, and some of it is just the organizations aren't winning, like the Knicks would have a tough time, right? Even the Cavs early on have a tough time. It depends on the organization. I think players, if they can do it, it's up to them if they want to. I mean, it's no different than us quitting a job because we don't like where we're at and we want to go somewhere else. Granted, they're under contract, but you know, if you feel like it's not working well, even as an organization, you should know this. You should just make the change as much as you can. Now, I wouldn't necessarily give him what he fucking asked for. Like, so James Harden, just so you know, Mike, got traded to the New Jersey Nets. I'm sorry, Brooklyn Nets. Sorry, still thinking of the old New Jersey Nets. But the Brooklyn Nets to play with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving whenever he decides to come back from his sabbatical and actually play the game. That's where he wanted to go.
Okay.
That, or he wanted to go to the Sixers. He was never going to go to the Sixers because the owner of the Rockets, former GM who he fired, was now the GM in the Sixers. He was never going to send him there. Never.
Yeah.
Just would not do that. They didn't want to send him to the Nets unless they got a boatload of stuff. And so the Nets ended up doing it. Basically, Houston got 3 players or 4 players and 4 first-round draft picks.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, they got more than they should have for this guy, but at least, you know, in that sense. So to your question, like, can players force themselves out? Yeah, you've seen it a few times. But I think it's up to the organization to just be strict and say, you know, fine, sit out a full year.
I think players today have too much power, though, to do that. I mean, not everybody's a Popovich. I mean, let's just be honest.
That's
not
true.
everybody's a Hall of Fame coach like Popovich.
Yeah,
not everybody, you know, can actually have that leverage.
Well, I think it's because
half the teams are small market teams, like and not so much in the NFL,
where it hurts, by the way.
the NBA and MLB is.
Yeah. But that is to your point. I think the small market team is where you're hitting it most.
Yeah.
You're going to see this on small market teams than you're going to see it on the big. Like, they're not going to force themselves out of the Lakers. Right? No one's going to force themselves off the Laker team and say, I got to get out of here. Because the Lakers, first off, 17-time championships as a team, 17 line, count them off. I got my banner right here in front of me too. It's got all 17. That being said, sorry, sidetracking, God, we talk about the Lakers. All I think about is greatness. But the point being, but Kobe at one point also was, considering wanting to leave. He was in a point, but the organization was strong. Again, it helped that they had Jerry West, but that's a strong presence. You have to have the right people in place to get these players to understand where it's going to happen. And if you don't, and you build your organization around them, then what are you surprised by when they suddenly want to leave?
Exactly. Shouldn't.
So the players take advantage of what they're given, and there's nothing wrong with that if the organization gives it to them.
Yeah, the
So
organization allows it and gives it to them. You're absolutely right. It's been fed to them that way, so they're going to feel entitled to it.
yeah, I mean, they
Absolutely
should have
makes
seen
sense.
this with Harden. He left OKC. Now he's gone. He went to Houston. They brought in multiple
They gave
players
him
over his time there. They gave him Chris Paul.
Yeah.
But what I loved is Shaq recently said when Harden basically made a comment. I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exacts, but basically Harden was saying, I've given everything on here, and this team's just not good enough. So he said that the night before he was traded. So I've given everything to I've left it all on the floor. And Shaq's basic response was, "What did you leave on the floor?" Every time it counted most, you shot less than 30%. You didn't score much at all, and that's leaving it on the floor.
And every time they asked something, they gave it to you.
He goes, every time you wanted someone, they got him for you. You wanted Chris Paul, they got you Chris Paul. That wasn't good enough. Then you wanted Westbrook, they got you Westbrook. Your buddy, your friend, your lifetime AAU partner, and you weren't happy there either.
Yeah.
So what are you leaving on the floor? They're giving you everything you want, and yet, so no.
See, and then it's going to come down to that part where the organization is allowing that to happen, right? If you look at the basketball teams back in the days, it wasn't about that. Those teams won with what they had already right there, right? The superstars came out of there. Those are the ones who came and flourished, and they're the ones who made the teams better, right? They didn't request for other players to come join them. They just said, "Nah, we're going to do this on our own." Right? We're going to stick with our coaches. We're going to do this, right? But these days, it seems like, based on what and I know who he is too, it seems like that they all want this, it's about me, and I want to create this fantasy team, dream team, and lead it this way when that's not how it works.
Yeah, and let me be also point this one element out. So now you have what they consider a super team, right? Because now you have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. So you have the three superstars, so it's a super team. Similar like when Durant came and joined the Warriors. But here's the difference from my perspective as to why they won't even come close to winning a title. Every time super teams have appeared, whether it was starting with the Celtics and having Paul Pierce, and then Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen were brought on. Mm-hmm. Paul Pierce was always there. That was his organization. He started there. He was there. For the Warriors, you had Curry and Klay Thompson started there, and Durant just joined on them. Yeah. In this case, Brooklyn literally is bringing in all three to play together. They're not going to win. There's no real understanding. There's no there's no pride. There's no, this is my team. We've been doing it for years. You're just helping to add more value to it. This is straight up just pieces thrown together and say, hey, let's go win. They're not going to win. They're not going to win a title at all.
I'm sorry. KD's weak. KD to me has always been great, phenomenal player. I'm not even saying that, but I mean, in terms of being like mentally strong and having that type, just you never seen it out of him. I mean, you saw him always not fit in at the Warriors. Kyrie, I love for what he did with the Cavs, but again, he was secondary to LeBron there, and Harden. We know Harden's not a leader. So I mean, who do they actually have who's going to keep the team flowing properly on offense, or even especially on defense? I mean, Kyrie's okay on defense; he's average. Harden, we know how horrible he is, and so KD's the only one that's going to play defense.
And they gave up their bench, by the way, Mike. So they lost some of their best players, young players. They gave up their young core so that they could get Harden. So they've lost their depth and they've lost some of their skill. Now, granted, Harden can put up points, but we all know in the playoffs, Harden disappears. He doesn't score for shit. So that's when they need him most, is in the playoffs. So it's to your, in the end, I think, like we said, organizations matter. If the organization is strong, then a player won't force himself out. Look how strong the organization was with the Bucks. Antetokounmpo re-signed. Now, there was no word that he was trying to force his way out. I think he really wanted to stay there, and that's maybe his personality. But, the Bucks kept him, and he could have definitely left that one and gone to like the Warriors or someone else and push for title. But to your point, players who move around, if you're traded, that's one thing against, you weren't expecting it. But forcing your way out, and look at Paul George, forced his way out, goes to the Clippers. Big game 7. They were up 3-1, 3-3. He's shooting shots that are hitting the side of the fucking backboard.
Yeah.
I mean, late in the game, that's what he's, and fair or not, the point is when it came time for him to, step up and show his value, he didn't. So, and those are the players who force their way out. They have no loyalty. And they tend to just go elsewhere. So now if they do a 2-year contract and after 2 years, this was what KD and LeBron and others tend to do, that's one thing, but they're still playing through their contract. They're only playing for those period of time. So it's a different mentality.
My other thing is, in being a Cleveland fan, I mean, it's being a small market. You see with the Indians as well. It's also once these players, and it's funny because people will say, the players should have the right to make the most money. We don't want to give all the money to the team shouldn't have so much control, blah blah blah. But there's something to be said coming up in the era that we did, where good organizations who drafted well and did all this well and managed things well did well. I mean, going back into the 70s, as much as I hate both teams, look at the Steelers and the Cowboys. I mean, all those guys on those teams were homegrown. I mean, even the Lakers. I mean, yes, Kareem came to the Lakers from.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. We always traded the big men, specifically the Lakers have always traded for, but they've always had those core players that they're coming to join.
Exactly.
And to your point, yep.
Yeah, and then you even look at what the 49ers did in the 80s, even you look at that and then you just see these landscapes changing, and there's like the thing of when people look at like some of the smaller cities that people don't care about, going to football you have Cleveland and then you have like Buffalo, and it's like they expect players just to leave there, but it's like you have a fan base, and as a fan base it's like as much as I'm for players maximizing their earning potential and all this, I also, it's you have millionaires playing for billionaires, right? When you're talking about sports. So I don't feel bad for any of those guys. I mean, you have most of these players making more than enough money to be able to support their family. I mean, $10 million if you can't
they make enough money, but let's be fair, not all, and it's unfortunate. There are plenty of instances where they blow through their money. Yeah. Well, I'm talking about they blow through their money.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I guess I just also look at the thing like, especially being, like you said, for small market or, here even locally, look at the A's. A lot of times you look at the A's and the Indians as teams that are farm teams for Boston and New York, and it's just it's true though.
Yeah, it is. Straight up. I agree. But more so the A's than the Indians.
Definitely more so the A's. The A's have just been phenomenal in terms of what they've done over the years, and they just get poached all the time. But it's like, I do look at it like as a fan of a team, it's like, if a team is a bad organization, to your point, Jenny, if they're a bad organization, then fine. But, it's like when you do have teams that are actually good organizations and, they get poached like that, as a fan of the game, it's just one of those things that cheapen it. To me, it's like, look, I understand the other point, and I'm not discounting that, but I also don't feel bad for somebody who rather make $100 million, over their career versus $80 million. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's a loyalty thing. In the end, it comes down to what you're saying. As a fan, you're loyal to the team. You expect the same loyalty from players. So when you see a player jump, it irritates you, and you've seen fans get frustrated.